Hello everyone and welcome back to another Sims 4 speed build video, and today we are building a very huge gigantic mega mansion within the Sims 4, focusing on a very modern and contemporary design. And I was just very excited to utilize those floor to ceiling glass windows that came in a recent update, and since they came out recently I wanted to put it to the test and just like create something that looked very extravagant and very luxurious and modern. And I felt like the best way I could just like utilize those floor to ceiling glass windows would be to just create something very huge and extravagant for you guys, especially because I know you guys really do enjoy my huge modern mansions, and just trying to incorporate some of these new updates into it and just like trying to see what I can create out of it, if that makes sense. So yeah, so we're actually starting off on the second floor, but this has actually ended up changing because I wanted to add a full floor. But yeah, we just have this very unique sort of like diagonal looking design at the front, or technically the back of the home, which I feel like looks super interesting. And we actually turn that into some sort of like den or like a hangout area, which showcases like some luxurious pieces such as like a nice simple car, because you know like cars aren't really functional within the game, but I wanted it to be displayed within this home as it feels like some sort of like art piece, which I feel like was kind of like a nice cool and unique take, especially since we have so much space throughout the entire home. I wanted to incorporate a lot of different unique rooms and features that you probably wouldn't really expect within a regular home. So yeah, so especially as you guys can really see right now, we have these very interesting tiers going on so far, and I just really loved how the shape of this home actually turned out. It sort of like motivated me even more to continue building with it, because before actually building this one I actually attempted to build something else and I just wasn't really happy with it, so I scrapped that and then I just moved on to building this. And I feel like this home definitely is the perfect one to actually portray and display all of those glass windows that we got from the most recent update. So yeah, I did actually use a combination of the ones that actually came from the most recent update, so I didn't just use the one that was like fully clear. I also utilized the one that had like these really thin panes that went across like each tile and stuff, which I feel like looked kind of cool. And right now I was actually really happy with how the build looked, but I noticed that I actually wanted a full floor and I couldn't create that, so I actually just ended up placing the entire build on some terrain just to like elevate it. And then we're actually utilizing the first, second, third floor, which I actually ended up skipping. I know it doesn't really make a lot of sense right now, but I actually built it on the second floor initially because I wanted it to be floating, because I wanted to add some sort of like fake pillars supporting the entire home, but that actually didn't end up working out because I wanted to use that full floor. So yeah, I just ended up utilizing the actual like original sort of like tiers and stuff. But yeah, you guys don't need to really worry about that too much. That was just like my technical stuff that I was just like thinking of how I'm going to work with that. But yeah, so we do also have the basement level as well, which I didn't add anything too fancy to it. So technically it is a 5-tier home, but I just added a nice simple office and a sort of like vault area to the basement level, which it's kind of just like something that I started doing recently in most of like my modern mega mansions, and I feel like it kind of just like makes sense, especially since if you're probably playing within this build, or even if you guys are just looking at it, it will probably make sense to just like, you know, have a vault where you can like keep all of your valuable items and stuff, and obviously your money. But yeah, just like try to make it feel and very luxurious and extravagant, which is sort of like the main goal with this build. And if you guys aren't really aware with the world that I'm building in, we are building in Del Sol Valley on the 50 by 40 lot. So we're not actually building on the biggest lot, but with how big this home is, you really don't need all of those extra tiles. You know, I feel like this 50 by 40 is plenty enough for a huge modern mansion like this. And the main color scheme of the home is obviously like that nice simple plain white color, but we do actually have quite a lot of dark contrasting accents going across the entire build. So you'll see we actually utilize a lot of these very nice dark tiles. So for the back end area of the home, we actually utilize these very sort of like dark, sort of like almost grayish brown tiles, which I actually really love the way they look, especially with the sun beaming down on them. Because at the front of the home, if you actually utilize the exact same tiles, they look very brown, but from the back end of the home, they don't actually look too brown. So it actually works with the color scheme that I was trying to go for. And the original sort of like gray or like the dark color swatch that comes with those tiles originally don't really look, you know, too dark, so it doesn't really contrast as well with the white. But I felt like this brown color definitely contrasted super nicely, which is the main reason why I actually ended up choosing that. And I did actually try to make all of the swimming pools within this build as functional as possible, so you will be able to actually access all of them. But you know, I just feel like it looked really nice and luxurious, especially with that glass sort of like wall design. I know I pretty much did that in all of my previous modern mega mansions as well, just by like utilizing some glass windows and sizing them down with the tool mod. But that just like, you know, this new update pretty much like eliminates all of those extra steps that you have to take in order to make something that looks very fancy. So yeah, just like having a bunch of different infinity pools, I feel like just made this home feel super luxurious, especially with the tiers that it has flowing down, especially since they're all really like close together and they sort of just like match. I just feel like it looked very nice and interesting overall. But yeah, so right now we're also utilizing a bunch of different tiles for the outdoor sort of like balcony areas as well. But I did actually end up changing most of the colors as well, because I felt like it just was a bit too flat and a bit too plain, especially when we had that sort of like beige and white color. It felt a bit too like too much of like a blend, which I didn't really like. So we do actually end up incorporating a bunch of different colors throughout this entire build. So this is not like a, you know, like a typical black and white contemporary mansion. Although there are certain elements of that within this build, you'd see that pretty much every single part of this house has a bunch of different color incorporated throughout it, which I feel like is something that a lot of people would probably prefer, especially when it comes to like, you know, actually playing and navigating throughout the entire build. You want to be able to actually move around and know where you are and like what sort of like level and floor and tier you're on. So I feel like with this build in particular, you will definitely be able to do that without any hassle or any issues. But I genuinely just really love the actual end result of these glass windows. I just feel like they look super nice and it just fits that modern aesthetic that I'm trying to go for, especially on that fourth tier that we are just moving on to right now. Like you can see we have so little actual like colored or concrete walls. Pretty much 90% of that fourth floor is pretty much all glass, which I feel like just looks super nice and extravagant. It just eliminates, you know, that very eyesore sort of like black paint that goes across each of the little panels when you're using those original windows. But I did actually end up using some actual windows throughout this entire build, but most of it is actually from the actual like wall panel, if that makes sense, which I feel like actually definitely turned out a lot more nicer. And I would also love to know your thoughts and suggestions about this sort of like glass wall windows in the comment sections below, because I want to see if you guys are interested and if you guys actually like it as well. I actually made a TikTok about it and it did actually get like around 200,000, which I feel like was kind of high. And a lot of people did address and mention that they didn't actually really like it that much, which I, you know, I understand that, like, fair enough. But at the same time, I feel like you can definitely get really creative with it and you're able to create a lot of different stuff with it. You know, like you can, if you made like a smaller home, I feel like it wouldn't really be that feasible for this build. But if you were actually making like a smaller home, you would probably be able to put like fake panels around it, or you can like surround it with a bunch of like sort of like vines and bushes and stuff if you're trying to create something that sort of like resembles the nature a lot more. Or you can just like create a lot of these like fake columns and stuff around it to create the actual like frames of the actual window. But I feel like not a lot of people, you know, like actually want to spend that much time when they're building. They just want to like build and then immediately get to playing. Whereas like for builders like me, or like people who want to actually like create something that looks unique, they'll probably want to, you know, explore it a little bit more and just like try to, you know, just like try to manipulate it and just like make it look as unique as possible for their builds, which is sort of like the main goal when I actually created this mansion right here. And if you guys are wondering, this home was actually inspired by one sort of like, it wasn't like an AI image, but it was sort of like a nice simple rendering, I believe. I'm not sure if it was real or not, but I just saw this tiered design for the pool and that really looked so interesting to me, and I really wanted to create something like that within the Sims 4. So yeah, that was just like the main inspiration behind this build. But unfortunately there wasn't any like other images of like the sides of it or the front of the home or the interior, so all of that is completely, you know, like original and fresh, which I just really love. You know, just like creating my own simple floor plan and just like trying to go with it and stuff. And I just really love the front of the home as well, because although it doesn't look as extravagant as the back end, mainly because this home is sort of like based on a hillside, I feel like it turned out very nicely overall, especially with all the nice unique looking tiers, which I feel like makes it look very interesting overall as well. And I did also try to make it just like feel a lot more as if it was on a hillside, just by like adding a bunch of different terrain and just like leveling out a bunch of different like areas of the home to make it feel and look as interesting as possible. And of course, coming with that does also involve adding a bunch of different foliage around all of that terrain manipulation as well, just to make it feel as if it was actually within that area of the home. And yeah, just like trying to make it feel as lived in and built in as possible. Just like added a bunch of different rocks and a bunch of different foliage that I feel like looked quite necessary for a build like this. So I added a bunch of different like colorful foliage throughout the entire build, as well as a bunch of different tropical plants and sort of like small little palm trees throughout the entire build, which I feel like made it feel a bit more luxurious as well, because I feel like a lot of palm trees and stuff within a build or within like an area of the home, makes it feel a bit more tropical and a bit more luxurious. And I did actually end up utilizing the tool mod as well throughout this entire build as well. And in the beginning of the build, I didn't actually have any of my mods enabled, mainly because the update came out so recently and I really didn't want to risk my entire build sort of like getting crashed or like my save having any issues. So I just ended up not utilizing any of it for the first few like hours or a few days. But then once I noticed that there wasn't really any updates for the mods that I was using, because I only used two mods, I only used the better build by and the tool mod, because they just help with like building and stuff. But yeah, the tool mod is just like super helpful and handy when it comes to just like creating unique foliage and stuff, because if you guys have obviously worked with terrain within the Sims 4, you would know how much of a struggle it is, especially when you're trying to place it on like terrain and stuff. It sort of like floats and stuff, which I feel like looks really unrealistic, which is sort of like not the goal that I'm trying to go for. And especially since I'm trying to create something that looks very realistic and like lived in, I really wanted to just like merge all of the plants and foliage within the actual ground itself. Obviously in certain areas I wasn't able to do it, but in areas where I could, I obviously just like lowered it down into the ground and just like made it feel a bit more realistic, which I just really loved overall. And I was also able to lower some rocks and a bunch of like different like individual pebbles and stuff into the ground itself as well, to make it sort of feel heightened and like tiered, as if to create some sort of like fake mountain effect, because it looks like a hill, but I wanted it to be as tall as possible to make it seem as if it was actually supporting the entire home overall. And up until this point, I was actually really happy with how the shell and the overall design of the home was actually coming out to be. So I just ended up moving on into adding the external sort of like furniture pieces around all of the balcony areas. And I just added a bunch of the sort of like modular sofa pieces to create custom sort of like lounge areas, along with like a bunch of different seating areas throughout this entire living space. Especially since we had a bunch of different balcony space, I wanted to utilize as much of it as possible to prevent it from being like completely empty, which I feel like doesn't really look that appealing, especially for a modern mega mansion like this. So yeah, I also utilized a bunch of different like outdoor specific furniture to make it feel a bit more realistic, rather than utilizing some of like the dining chairs that I typically do. And I also utilize a bunch of different unique sort of like features to make the external sort of like furniture pieces feel a bit more functional, so there's sort of like an actual purpose to actually go out there and actually utilize those object pieces. And I did actually incorporate a bunch of different like small little features, such as like some nice simple drink trays and a bunch of different like sun lounges and stuff. And I actually ended up going with the businesses and hobbies railings throughout this entire build, because out of all of the railings in this entire game, I feel like those are the most viable for modern homes. I really do like the glass one, but I feel like that covers it up a bit too much. But these ones in particular just look like a really simple thin line of pixels that I feel like you don't really see, being like an eyesore, or it doesn't really obstruct your view in any way, shape or form. And I feel like it's just like the best option to go for if you are building these like modern mega mansions and stuff. But yeah, so onto the second floor of the balcony area, I just added some additional small simple lounging and seating areas, a nice simple outdoor fireplace, and a nice simple entertaining TV unit area. And on the third floor, we added this nice simple little like rooftop sort of like fireplace area, which I feel like looked really nice. And I also added some nice simple sun lounges as well to make it feel a bit more lived in and cozy, because I feel like that makes it feel a bit more realistic for a luxurious mansion like this. And I actually really love this section of the home where you have to pass a bridge in order to access those sort of like functional pieces. I feel like that's like a very unique and interesting take. And on the other side of the actual home, we do actually have a bunch more other functional object pieces, such as a very nice huge sort of like outdoor kitchen area, which we incorporated a nice simple barbecue area, along with like a nice simple sink, a bin, a little mini fridge, along with a nice simple bar area as well. And of course a very huge table just to like house all of the people that would be living within this home. And I just went with like a nice simple color scheme for this kitchen area, especially since it's not really that big of an area of the home. I just went with like a nice simple marble and beige sort of like tile design throughout all of the kitchen area. And I also added some additional seating area off to where the sort of like grassy side of this balcony area was, just to like house some extra guests and stuff, especially since I would probably expect this home to be utilized as some sort of like entertainment space. Especially if this was a home within real life, you'll probably be expecting quite a lot of different like guests and stuff. So I was trying to incorporate a lot of stuff rather than having few of something, if that makes sense. So yeah, just like also added a bunch of different foliage throughout the balcony areas as well. Just like added a bunch of different like fancy looking potted plants and stuff. And if you guys have been watching up until this point, I really do appreciate you guys. And if you guys aren't subscribed already, make sure to consider subscribing, as we're very close to reaching 5,000 subscribers. So I really do appreciate that. But yeah, so now we're actually moving on into the interior of the build, and we're actually starting off with the first level kitchen. So we do actually have two different kitchens in this entire build, because I feel like it kind of just like makes sense, especially with how big this home is. I really didn't want to stick to like a super contrasty color scheme, mainly because I wanted to incorporate a bunch of different color to this build. So yeah, I just like sort of placed all of this furniture out, and I just noticed that like I feel like it felt a bit too simple. I feel like I would probably prefer it if it was just a build that I created for myself, but I feel like a lot of people definitely do enjoy a lot more of color and stuff like that. So I feel like I wanted to incorporate that within this build in particular. So I know it doesn't really look like we incorporate color right now, but we are going to be adding a bunch of different color throughout this entire build. And I just started off by like placing all of the island counters to be this like dark sage sort of greenish color, which I feel like looked really nice, and I feel like it's like a color that I don't really utilize in any of my builds. So I feel like it kind of makes sense to just like go with a nice unique take for this build in particular. So we're going for this very nice simple sort of like greenish color for the actual main entrance area of the home, not just for the kitchen area, which I feel like looks really nice overall. But yeah, I also really love the contrasting countertops from the main counters and the island counters. I feel like that just looks very nice and interesting overall. And I also really love placing this very nice simple like pendant lighting off to the side of where we have the counter, because I feel like in a modern home like this that incorporates a bunch of different saucer lights, I really do also enjoy creating and just like placing a bunch of these unique pendant lights and a bunch of different like sconces throughout the entire build as well, because I feel like it gives a bit more of a variety when it comes to the lighting and stuff. And I feel like it also does end up filling up all of the wall spaces as well, which I feel like is kind of important, especially when it comes to a modern home like this. Because although I really do actually like seeing a lot of these like nice plain white walls and stuff throughout the entire home, I do actually like adding a small little details here and there, whether it's like a painting or a nice simple wall sconce. But yeah, I also just added some nice simple under sort of like lighting strips below the countertops as well, but I feel like they sort of just like gave a nice sort of like lighting effect to this kitchen overall. And I just kept the clutter to a limited amount because I didn't want to clutter it up too much to the point where I feel like it would just be a bit too much. So yeah, I just kept it to a very small little like minimal state. And I feel like although this is like the main area of the home, I feel like you'd probably prefer to be within the kitchen on the other floors and stuff, rather than always being on the first and second floor, if that makes sense. So yeah, just like added a bunch of nice simple foliage throughout this entire home. And I also added a very nice simple accent wall, which is sort of like this dark blue turquoisey colored sort of like tiling, which I feel like looks very nice. And I believe that specific tiling came from the Growing Together expansion pack. And I just really love doing this design in pretty much all of my kitchens. I feel like it just looks very nice overall, especially when it comes to creating these more modern and luxurious kitchens. It just works out very nice with the contrast, especially if you're going for these like nice, bright, plain and simple counters. It just contrasts very nicely to the point where I feel like it works in pretty much any of my kitchens that I enjoy creating. And for the entrance of the home, I of course added a nice simple sort of like burglar alarm, just like try to create a nice simple homey environment and entrance. Although we're going for a very modern theme, I still wanted to keep it relatively artsy, so you'll see a lot of different like sort of like funky unique pieces throughout the entire build, which I feel like makes this home feel a bit more realistic and cozy in my opinion. And of course just added a bunch of different rugs and small little like carpet areas throughout the entire build as well. And right now you guys can pretty much see that this living space feels a little bit boring. We don't really have a lot of color to work with and stuff, and all of the flooring is like this very plain sort of like marble tiling, which I actually really love. But I wanted to compartmentalize all of the different like rooms and spaces within this build without having to actually create like individual rooms for them. So in that case, I just ended up changing some of the wallpaper along with the actual like flooring as well. So for the living space itself, we actually ended up utilizing this very sort of like nice simple dark sage greenish color, which sort of reminds me of the exact same green color that we actually utilize within the kitchen itself. And I feel like it ties in the entire sort of like first level of the home very nicely just by like utilizing this small little accent color throughout the entire build. It just makes it feel a bit more cozier and luxurious, and I feel like it actually worked out very nicely overall with that modern and contemporary design and take that I was trying to go for. Because despite it being a very harsh looking color, it actually worked out very nicely with the rest of the modern furniture pieces that I have placed around it. And as you guys can already see, we also went with these very nice simple beige sofa pieces, which came from, I believe, the Life and Death expansion pack, and I also utilized the coffee table, which came from one of the most recent kits. And of course, I also just like utilized some nice simple magazines on a side table, which I feel like made it feel a bit more cozier as well. Just like added some nice simple clutter, nothing too major. And of course, I also added a nice simple sort of like small fancy artsy looking shelving unit off to the side of the wall, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall, and it sort of like links with the rest of the white color scheme that we have going across the entire home overall. And I actually utilized quite a lot of these like Dream Home Decorator wall counters, the thin versions of them, throughout this entire first floor. I just feel like it worked out very nicely overall. And once again, we're going for that very nice sort of like simple green sage color for the dining table area as well. And of course, added a nice simple rug under it as well. So instead of adding like an actual rug, I just ended up changing the flooring to be this sort of like carpet texture, which I feel like is something that I don't really tend to do in most of my modern builds, but I feel like within this build in particular, I feel like it actually turned out very nicely overall. And I also wanted to make sure that the walls around this entire home didn't really feel too bare, so I just added a bunch of different like sort of like shelving storage options and a lot of different like sort of like simple mirrors throughout the entire build as well. And I actually really love how I was able to sort of like merge these two paintings into each other and sort of like create my own custom version looking one, which I actually feel like that looked a lot nicer than the original, especially since the one that came with a bunch of different paintings had a bunch of different like weird color swatches and frames around it, which I feel like didn't really fit the vibe that I was trying to go for. So I feel like just by like merging them into each other, I feel like that worked out very nicely overall, and you just like made a nice simple cozy sort of like open space dining space area. And here off to the right hand side of the home, we do actually have a very spacious and luxurious looking office area, which I actually really love how this turned out. And I feel like it doesn't really make sense, especially since they have a stairs within this room leading down into an office space, but I feel like the one in the underground area is technically like a more private or like a secretive one to like sort of like hide out the vault, if that makes sense. So this one in particular is sort of like the main office space for this build in particular. And I just really love that sort of like floor to ceiling glass diagonal windows that we have going across this side of the home. I just feel like it makes it feel very luxurious. And I also utilize some of the Dream Home Decorator modular shelving units as well, just to like create some custom shelving pieces as well, just like to act as if there was like a bunch of different storage space and stuff. And I of course altered and moved a bunch of different stuff around just to like make everything fit and ensure that everything worked out very nicely. So for this area in particular, I just utilized the thin shelving unit pieces, but then I noticed that I felt like it felt a bit too much, especially since the ones that were like stacked on top of each other right next to the wall felt a little bit too much. So I just ended up removing those and just like utilizing some very nice thin sort of like shelving unit pieces along the centers of each of the actual like modular counter pieces, if that makes sense. But yeah, so since we were actually working with quite a relatively huge space, I also wanted to incorporate its own sort of like seating area within the office space itself as well. So I actually ended up going with this sort of like custom looking design where we have these sort of like half shelved sort of like wall cabinet units on either side of the fireplace. So I actually went with a very nice and unique design, which is just by like placing a fireplace in the center along with like these sort of like custom cabinet units on either side, and just like try to make it feel as if it was like a nice simple built-in unit area. And I actually really love how this area turned out in particular as well, because I feel like although we didn't incorporate a lot of different color within this room itself, I feel like the small little like hinted sort of like colors and like the muted browns and the muted greens really do make it feel a bit more luxurious rather than having, you know, like a plain white or like a plain all beige sort of like color layout. And I feel like the small little like color pieces really do make this home feel a bit more sort of like mature and elegant. And moving on into the small little like ensuite area, nothing too special. I just added a nice simple little bathroom for the office area, but pretty much we do also have a sort of like public like open space bathroom on the first floor as well, along with like all of the other floors as well. But pretty much all of the rooms throughout this entire build definitely do have their own ensuites, which I feel like is a very luxurious thing, and I feel like it kind of makes sense for a very modern mega mansion like this. But yeah, just utilize some of my favorite bathroom pieces, such as like that very fancy looking sink and that very fancy bathtub as well, which I actually really love utilizing, which I believe that also came from the Businesses and Hobbies expansion pack, which is honestly just one of my favorite ones when it comes to creating these more luxurious bathrooms and designs. Yeah, so we're actually moving on off to where we have the hallway that leads you towards the back end area of the home, and we're actually starting off by like adding some furniture into the sort of like at-home movie theater ensuite. So I just created a nice simple half bathroom for this movie theater area, just like added some nice simple designs and stuff like that, nothing too special. So yeah, just added a nice simple huge sort of like TV space area, and also added these nice simple massage chairs just to like emulate a very nice simple at-home movie theater. And I also utilized one of my favorite wallpaper designs for this movie theater as well, in like a nice simple black swatch. And I feel like it just works out very nicely overall because it has this very nice simple design to it that I feel like makes it feel very luxurious, which is the main reason why I just ended up utilizing it in pretty much like most of the areas of the home. And just added some nice simple mood lighting throughout this entire sort of like movie theater area. And I of course also added a nice simple arch that leads you into the ensuite area as well. And yeah, so I also went around the entire movie theater area and just some nice simple modern looking spotlights, as well as like some nice simple modern wall sconces as well that sort of just like only emit light that is facing upwards, which I feel like kind of gives it very limited lighting, but that is pretty much what we wanted for this area of the home in particular anyway. And of course just added some nice simple speakers throughout the entire room as well, because I feel like it kind of made sense to do that in a movie theater. But yeah, so now we're actually moving on into this sort of like very fancy man cave sort of area, if you want to call it that. So the main idea behind this area of the build is generally to sort of just like act as like a display area for like your possessions and stuff. So you might want to incorporate some unique looking like art pieces or a bunch of different like statues and stuff throughout this entire room. But in this case, since we had this very huge sort of like glass opening towards the back end area of the home, I feel like it looked very luxurious, and it really did feel like a place where you can just like place a very fancy sort of like art sculpture there. So in that case, since we don't really have functional cars, I feel like why not just like utilize one of the cars just like sized up into being one of the sort of like art statement pieces. And initially I wanted to actually place it on this very huge sort of like sized up table which came from the businesses and hobbies expansion pack. It's sort of just like one of the pedestals which you can place like products and stuff on it, but unfortunately I wasn't able to utilize it because every single time I lowered it into the ground, it will sort of just like get removed because the game sort of like thinks it's like merged between the walls and the floor and stuff, which I feel like it makes sense because it is, but at the same time I really wanted it to work because I feel like it worked out very nicely overall. So instead I just ended up changing it into a nice simple circular rug, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall as well, and I feel like it looked equally as nice even though it wasn't elevated on top of like a nice simple platform. I feel like it still really turned out nicely overall. And we do also have a very spacious sort of like seating area within this area of the home as well, along with like a nice simple sort of like TV unit area, which is obviously like created with those custom sort of like shelving unit pieces. And we do also house a bunch of different like functional objects as well, such as like a nice simple woodworking station. So this is sort of just like an at-home garage, while it's not actually a garage either because, you know, it doesn't really have any access to the outdoor area, but I feel like it still sort of like works and functions as if it was one, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I just added a nice simple fancy seating area within this space, along with like a nice simple desk area as well, if you guys wanted to like utilize this space as an office as well. So you pretty much have a bunch of different options when it comes to, you know, like doing a bunch of different stuff throughout this entire build, because we have so many unique rooms and spaces throughout this entire home. I feel like there's a bunch of different like unique ways that you can like actually utilize all of this space, and I just really love how all of it actually turned out to be, especially since it felt super cohesive, especially with all of the color designs and like all of the furniture pieces that I have chosen for this entire build overall. And I just put like a nice simple seating area, and I also utilized one of the businesses and hobbies display sort of like tables as a coffee table area. I don't know how functional that would really be when it comes to actually utilizing it as a coffee table, so I actually just ended up utilizing it as a nice simple like area to add a bunch of different clutter, and just added a nice simple candle tray along with like a nice simple magazine holder, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall. And I also incorporated a very nice oversized carpet, which I feel like worked very nicely within the space, especially since we had a bunch of different seating areas and a bunch of different like small little tables out and about and stuff. I really wanted to encompass all of that as possible around the entire rug itself. And of course we do also add some nice simple unique sort of like lighting fixtures throughout this entire space as well. So you'll see we actually incorporate a bunch of different pendant lighting, as well as a lot of different like unique sconce lighting throughout this entire room as well. Just like try to make it feel super modern and luxurious, while also trying to make it feel very luxurious and artsy as well. And I also wanted to incorporate some artsy paintings as well, such as like some nice unique sort of like maybe like some car art and stuff, or like some pictures and paintings of cars and stuff, but we don't really have anything like that within the game, so I couldn't really, you know, dedicate it completely towards being like a car showcase room or like an artsy room, because we didn't really have quite a lot of those specific objects. But I feel like it still really turned out very nicely overall. But yeah, so we're actually moving on into the room that is sort of like connected and is only accessible through that sort of like man cave area, which is sort of like this nice simple gym area, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall. I feel like although we don't really have a lot of space within this gym space area itself, I feel like it worked out very nicely overall, especially since we don't really have a lot of gym equipment within the game itself. So I feel like with the amount of space that we had, I feel like it felt cozy enough. I feel like we fit all of the necessary objects very nicely within this room itself as well. And I also added a nice simple massage bed there as well, just to like make some additional functionality within the space as well, because I wanted to add as many of the functional objects and pieces within the game that is possible within this build. Especially with how big it is, you'll probably be expecting to have everything within the entire home. So yeah, I was just trying to think about everything that was possibly added within the game, just to like make sure that I can incorporate it within this build. The only thing that this build doesn't really have is an actual bowling alley, but I feel like that's not really that necessary. But yeah, so we do actually have this small little room off to the end of the hallway, which houses this nice small little like laundry room area, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall, especially since it just houses all of the necessary objects as the gym does as well, but just like in a small little like necessary area, so it doesn't really take up too much space, so you're able to utilize the rest of the huge rooms and parts of the home to be functional and just like be utilized as something else, rather than like having a very huge unnecessary laundry room, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall. But yeah, so we're actually moving on into the second floor now. So I don't really actually show every single room that I actually decorated and designed, or all of the bedrooms that we have throughout this entire home, but if you guys are interested in seeing every single room and every single bedroom with all of the designs and stuff, I would highly recommend you guys stick around towards the end of the video so you can see the entire tour of this entire home, so you can pretty much get an idea of what the floor plan and layout looks like. And there will also be a top-down view of the entire home, so you'll pretty much see the entire floor plan for each level of the home if you guys are interested in seeing the floor plan overall. But yeah, so for this bedroom in particular, we actually went for a very nice simple beige color scheme. And although that is not the case for the rest of the bedrooms, I feel like this one I wanted to showcase mainly because it was off to the side of the home, and I just really loved how cozy and like sort of like luxurious it felt, especially since it housed most of the modern furniture pieces that you would probably expect within a modern home like this, and especially since it was relatively big to the point where I can add a very nice simple little like living space as well. I just added a nice simple fireplace area along with like a nice simple TV unit area, and of course I just added a nice simple dresser as well. And the rest of the bedrooms throughout this entire home do actually incorporate a bunch of different designs and layouts, so you wouldn't see the exact same beds or the furniture pieces throughout the rest of the bedrooms, so they're all equally designed in their own unique way, which I actually really love, especially since it helps with navigation and moving around the entire home, so you're pretty much able to familiarize yourself with all of the different like unique rooms and designs of the home, so you'll pretty much know what level floor you're on and stuff, which I feel like is kind of helpful, especially if you're actually planning to play within this build overall. But yeah, so right next to where we have this very luxurious bedroom, we do also have some kid rooms as well. So we do actually have a dedicated boys room and a dedicated girls room as well, and in the center of both of their rooms we do actually have a bathroom, so those are actually connected within each other, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like a Jack and Jill sort of bathroom situation, which I feel like is kind of like a nice unique take, especially since it's not something that I generally tend to build, mainly because I feel like we don't really have a lot of space to work with in my other previous mansions and stuff. But I feel like within this situation, since I wanted to make it feel a bit more of like a family friendly type of home, I really wanted to make sure that I incorporated a bunch of different like family features, and I felt like by adding this I feel like it kind of made it feel a bit more homey and as if it was like an actual family home, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just went with like a nice simple generic sort of like boys and girls rooms. But yeah, so I didn't really do anything fancy for either of their bedrooms in particular, besides like adding some nice simple color schemes to them. So for her room in particular, I just went with like a nice simple sort of like peachy pastel sort of like pink color, which I feel like looked nice and simple, and I didn't really want to add too much to it, especially since we weren't really working with quite a lot of these like huge rooms anyway. But I still wanted to make it feel as if it was like all matching and stuff, just like try to make it feel a bit more cozy and luxurious. And I actually did the exact same thing for the boys bedroom as well, just like added some nice simple color schemes, mainly focusing on that nice simple blue color. And I wanted to incorporate a nice simple desk within each of their bedrooms as well, just like if they were planning to like do homework and stuff, they can also, you know, like utilize that desk and stuff without having to like, you know, utilize some of the office spaces or the dining tables and stuff. So yeah, just try to add some nice simple functional features to either one of the bedrooms as well to make it feel as realistic as possible, and also added some nice simple rugs as well that I feel like sort of like matched their sort of like theme, if that makes sense. Even though there wasn't really a specific theme for either of their bedrooms, I feel like it still turned out very nicely overall, especially for someone like me who doesn't really create a lot of these like kids bedroom and stuff for my modern houses and stuff. It was sort of like a nice little change for me as well, just like to incorporate some nice unique features within my builds as well. So yeah, I also have some nice simple sort of like laptops as well, because I feel like it kind of is really helpful when it comes to actually playing the game. But for aesthetic purposes, I feel like it also really looked nice overall for the desk area itself as well. And yeah, just added some nice simple wall fixtures as well, and like some nice simple like mood lighting on their bedside tables as well. But yeah, so moving on into the third floor now, we're actually starting off with this main sort of like seating area, which we're actually utilizing the modern dream home decorator furniture pieces. Now, I do actually really enjoy creating a lot of these like more modular sofa piece designs, but since we have quite a lot of space on the third floor, I feel like it kind of felt the best to do it within this level of the home in comparison to the rest. And I feel like it turned out very nicely overall, because I feel like the third floor is sort of just like the more of like an hangout space, especially since it connects you to the bigger areas of the home, such as the outdoor balcony areas and the pools, along with the outdoor sort of like seating and like barbecue area, which is like the main outdoor kitchen area, which I feel like works out very nicely overall for this build. And of course, we added a bunch of different clutter to the small little like coffee tables that we have in the center of the space as well. And I just added a bunch of different accent walls throughout this entire home as well, which features or like houses the actual like TV unit area and the fireplaces as well. And I of course utilize one of my favorite fireplaces, which is that very modern boxy one, which I feel like works out very nicely for these modern and contemporary homes. And in certain areas of the home, we do actually incorporate a few curtains here and there as well, because I feel like quite a lot of people do actually mention that as well to me, where people are actually wondering if I actually intentionally leave my homes without curtains and stuff. I do actually end up leaving out most of the curtains and stuff from my builds, mainly because I feel like it does actually alter the lighting a little bit too much for my liking, and sometimes it just doesn't really work out very nicely. Sometimes they do actually glitch out as well. So if you're looking at the house from the exterior and stuff, sometimes they sort of like blink out into existence, or sometimes they come back, and it's just like a bit random. So yeah, I feel like it's just like it's a little bit too buggy for me, so I don't really tend to utilize the curtains that often. If it was in a smaller build, I'll definitely add them a bit more, but when it comes to these huge modern mega mansions, I feel like less is a little bit more sometimes, especially when you don't really need a lot of privacy in a huge mansion like this. I mean, nobody's going to be looking into your full floor, so yeah, I feel like it kind of makes sense to just like not incorporate too much curtains throughout the entire build, but where it's sort of like necessary, I feel like I definitely do tend to add them instead. But especially since we're utilizing those new windows and stuff, I really did want to incorporate a bunch of different floor to ceiling curtains, which is the main reason why I actually ended up utilizing them within this modern mega mansion instead. And we do actually utilize the Desert Luxe kit curtains, in case you guys are wondering, which is the kit that actually was free quite a few years ago now. But if you guys were able to catch it at that point, I'm sure pretty much a lot of people do actually have that kit already. So that's the main reason why I actually just like really love utilizing those curtains in general, because I feel like a lot more people definitely do have them. But yeah, so we're actually moving on into this very unique bedroom area. So even though I don't actually showcase all of the bedrooms and rooms that I create within this build, I really want to show this one in particular, mainly because I just really love how it turned out overall. I feel like it looks really nice and unique, especially with how, besides that rooftop bridge sort of like connection piece, I feel like this part of the home is relatively detached, which I feel like is kind of like a nice unique take for a huge modern mega mansion like this. I feel like this part of the home can definitely be used as like some sort of guest suite, because I feel like it just works very nicely, especially since it is completely detached and they pretty much have like their own sort of like private pool area, and the stairs right next to them in the center of like that balcony area leads you straight up to like one of the kitchen areas, which I feel like works very nicely for a sort of like guest house suite environment. And I actually went for one of my favorite color schemes for this bedroom in particular, which is sort of like incorporating these nice simple dark and light brown colors along with like some nice simple beige and whites throughout this entire bedroom, which I feel like makes it feel very fancy and luxurious. And I of course created one of my favorite designs with those sort of like wall shelving units, which is pretty much like placing them right behind where the bed is, which I feel like is pretending to be as if it was like a very long thin line of a bedside table, and just like placing the bed in front of it, which I feel like makes it feel very luxurious overall. And of course I also added some very nice simple pendant lightings on either side of the counters as well, which I feel like also makes it feel very luxurious as well, especially since we're utilizing that very tall wall height. I feel like it kind of makes sense to just like take advantage of that with all the pendant lightings that we have. within the game. And of course I also wanted to utilize a nice simple ensuite for this area of the home as well, especially since they are in a completely detached area of the home. I feel like it kind of makes sense that they have all of the necessary objects that you would probably expect to find within a small little guest suite like this, but the rest of the functional objects such as like a nice simple living space and a kitchen is also super close to them as well. But yeah, so speaking of that, we're actually moving on into the fourth floor now, which is where we house the second kitchen space, which I actually really love how this one turned out in particular, because I feel like it also follows that same color scheme that we have going across the entire build overall as well. And we're actually going for a bit more of a darker color scheme for this kitchen, which I actually really love the design and overall process of it as well. So initially I actually ended up going for the Dream Home Decorator modular pieces and the counters that came from that game pack, but I actually ended up changing the color swatches of them to be a little bit more different as well. And this kitchen in particular actually reminds me of the one that we have on the first floor as well, especially since we're actually utilizing the same tiles but in like a nice dark gray swatch. We also have the nice simple under lighting from the cabinets as well, but I also wanted to make this kitchen feel a bit more luxurious as well, so I actually just ended up changing the island counters to be the ones from the island living, mainly because I just really love the waterfall effect that the island living counters give for your build. It just makes it feel a bit more luxurious, especially with the different color and texture that it has for the counters themselves. It just makes it feel a bit more realistic and luxurious in my opinion. And one of my favorite designs is when you sort of like create the island counters and you want to place something within them. I pretty much like take one of the island counters and copy it, and then I just place some clutter pieces on top of it, and I pretty much like move that counter into the centers of where the rest of the counters are. And although it might seem a little buggy or not really that realistic, I feel like it turned out very nicely overall, and I'm pretty much just able to move those clutter pieces anywhere that I want throughout all of the kitchen counter table areas, which I feel like works out very nicely overall, and it gives you a lot of creative freedom to place all of the clutter that you want throughout all of the island counters areas. And I feel like especially since the colors match so well, you really don't see any like glitches and stuff like that. So yeah, it really just like is a super useful way of just like adding a bunch of different clutter onto your island counters if you guys are interested in things like that. But yeah, so I just felt like that was like a nice unique way to add a lot of different sort of like clutter pieces to your island counters without it being too much of a hassle, if that makes sense. And we do also have a small little nook off to the left hand side of this kitchen where we house a very nice simple like little coffee unit station area, which I feel like turned out very nicely overall. I just really love utilizing that within my builds because I feel like it feels very luxurious to have something like that within a very luxurious home, and especially within a home like this I feel like you would probably expect something like that. So yeah, I just wanted to add a nice simple sort of like coffee machine area. But yeah, so moving on into this small little like living space that we have on the full floor as well, especially since we're pretty much surrounded by glass. I just really love how we have this centerpiece of this sort of like living space that has this very nice simple sort of like wooden textured wallpaper design, and I feel like it just looks very nicely overall, just like housing all of the sort of like fireplace unit areas and the TVs. I feel like that looks very nice and luxurious. And I also just placed some nice simple book nook kit two-seaters along each other just to like make it feel like it's like a very long L-shaped couch, even though it really isn't. But I feel like it still turned out very nicely overall, especially with all of the nice simple clutter pieces that we have placed on the coffee table itself as well. But yeah, so we're actually moving on into this very huge grand master suite area for this build. And although we do actually have some bedrooms that are relatively bigger than this one in particular, I just feel like this one turned out very nicely overall, especially since pretty much the entire area of this bedroom is pretty much made out of these like floor to ceiling glass walls. And I just really love how it turned out with all of that natural lighting. I just feel like it worked out very nicely overall, and I just did the exact same design that I usually create in most of like my more fancy and luxurious rooms, which is where I place this wall counter pieces off to the floor so it acts as if it feels like some sort of like bedside table area. And I of course place this very fancy looking bed right in front of it, which I feel like looks super luxurious, and it's just like one of my favorite designs when it comes to creating these more luxurious rooms in particular. And I also placed one of my favorite paintings, which you'll probably see quite a lot throughout this entire build, which I feel like is like a very suitable painting that you can place in most of your modern homes, because I feel like there's a lot of different variations of that painting itself as well. And yeah, it just gives you a lot of like, and yeah, I just feel like it's like a nice way to incorporate a lot of different like muted simple colors throughout your entire room, while also adding a nice simple painting to the space as well. And since we don't really have a lot of space to add like a nice simple sort of like living space within this bedroom itself, I wanted to incorporate a nice simple indoor fireplace area, which I believe that fireplace did actually come from the businesses and hobbies expansion pack, and I believe it's not really meant to be used within an indoor environment like this, but I still wanted to utilize it anyway because I feel like I just wanted to give it that more luxurious vibe to it. And I did actually create a very huge sort of like walk-in wardrobe area towards the backside of where we had that bed, and I just feel like it looked very nicely overall and ties in that very luxurious element and vibe that I was trying to go for. And yeah, I didn't really know what else that I could really utilize for this space in particular, because we did actually have quite a lot of the rest of the activities that you can probably expect within the entire game throughout this entire home. And I did actually decide to add these nice simple modular sort of pieces towards the center of where we had this room, and I pretty much just placed some nice simple jewelry pieces on top of it to pretend as if that sort of like island counterpiece area was sort of just like a place where you can like house all of your jewelry and stuff, because I feel like a lot of luxurious homes in real life that have walk-in wardrobes and those island sort of like table unit areas, they have a lot of these like drawers and stuff made of glass and stuff that like house a lot of these like jewelries and stuff, which I feel like looks very fancy and luxurious. And that also was like the main goal behind that as I was creating this sort of like island piece area as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this entire sort of like master suite bedroom area. Although it's not really that spacious, I feel like it still turned out very nicely overall and sort of gave it that luxurious element that I was trying to go for. And of course, I also changed the lighting for that room as well, just like added some nice simple pendant chandeliers and stuff, which I feel like made it feel very luxurious as well. And yeah, so we're actually finally moving on into the master suite sort of like ensuite, which I feel like is a very nice and simple one, nothing too special. We just added a nice simple shower along with like a nice simple bathtub and of course a double sink unit area. And yeah, so that was pretty much it for this entire speed build. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and comment down below if you guys like this build or not. I would love to know your thoughts and suggestions down below in the comments, and especially since the new Enchanted by Nature expansion pack is coming out soon, I'd love to know if you guys are interested and if you guys are going to be purchasing that pack. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel if you guys are interested in builds like these. So thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.